Alright, here's the video guide for my Yaomac Vaal Breach Bomber. To preface, this is an adaptation of a mapping build that was popularized in 3.22. I saw the changes to Yaomac and figured I could give it viable bossing damage as well. I've linked to a video by Crouching Tuna, which goes into a 3.23 version of the build that's still full send on mapping content, with magic find, all that good stuff. No bossing in case you want to just yoink that part. My contribution is Yaomac Vaal Breaching, which should be applicable not just to this build, but a few others as well. More on that later. There's also a link to the forum version of the guide, as well as my current POB in the description too. Onto the actual guide. Like the forum version, I'll be splitting this up into 3 distinct sections: the defensive package, the mapping package, and the bossing package. In the background of the video, you'll be seeing relevant gameplay footage to whatever I'm talking about. In the background of the face cam, you'll be seeing Blaha, Acrid, and Roa, and on my desktop background, you'll be seeing a funny cat picture that I like. Alright, defensively, we're abusing Petrified Blood with Defiance of Destiny. This is an honestly broken combo released in 3.22 that somehow hadn't been nerfed or outright deleted in the update. For the price of our amulet and 35% reservation, we become almost immortal to anything that doesn't one-shot. In order to prevent one-shots from there, we get 90 fire res via Charms and Fury of Fire, as well as some points on Tree, and get that fire res to apply to our other elemental resistances via Chieftain. We stack physical mitigation through Fizz Taken as Fire, endurance charges, and a little lick of armor. Arctic armor from there boosts our physical mitigation, fire mitigation, and the ruby flask we're wearing takes us even further beyond. Brave's Veil lets us pick between crit immunity and curse immunity by wearing a magic ring. I use crit immunity by default, but sometimes swap to curse if the map has both vulnerability and temp chains, or if I click that thing in the Wildwood, which makes you mega vulnerable. The goal is to be able to park your ass on top of a boss inside 2 or 3 breaches without needing to move, and by God, we achieve that. Not having to move means you get to take advantage of Ramako's Sun's Like, making enemy fire resistance negative 20% against damage over time. That Ramako resistance is a good segue into our offensive packages. For map clear, we've got Hinakora's Death Fury, a 5% chance to make enemies explode for 500% of their maximum life as fire damage. Stack Ignite chance to 100% and get a fuckload of Ignite duration. Mine lasts 9 to 10 seconds. We reflected a massive Ignite back onto ourselves using the Fulcrum Staff. Ignite has a 1.7 meter radius proliferation, basically turning us into a 5 million DPS Righteous Fire build for the next 10 seconds. The explosion also consistently kills everything near the detonation point, greatly gassing up our clear speed and manhandling expeditions. We then use our long Ignite duration to sprint to the next group of enemies and burn them until they explode, rinse repeat until the entire map is dead. Tuna's guide, which I've linked below, goes into more detail on how this plays out while mapping, but we're basically an auto bomber, more or less. Content-wise, I've been using it in Breaches, Ultimatums, and Expeditions. Breaches and Expeditions are amazing with this character, and Ultimatums have been alright. You're tanky enough to do them, but the corpses go away too fast for the proliferation to really feel good. I haven't done them yet, but I also suspect the build is going to be good at Legion, Ritual, Blight, and Harbinger, just because they're really dense mechanics that the explosions are going to do well in. For bossing, we've got Vaal Breach Tech. The new Yaomac has 80% less soul cost for non-aura Vaal skills, which takes our Vaal Breach from having 1 charge to having 5. We then also pop Triumvirate Authority on to bring that 5 to 7 or more. So while normally a build like this really struggles to consistently kill bosses, we get 7 goes at turning something like Maven to paste via explosions. And notably, Maven has 6 immunity phases, which means if done right, you never have to recharge your Vaal Breach. You just pop 1 after each phase and you're good to go. To charge the Vaal Breach, we've got a Soul Ripper and the Traitor Keystone. With the charged gain enchantment, I can charge my Vaal Breach in 15 seconds at the start of the fight, and will easily have a full flask again by the time I run out of my 5 to 7 uses. Basically, it's 100% uptime on Vaal Breach. So, we enter a fight, weapon swap to Yaomac, AFK for 15 seconds, re-equip our flask, drop a Vaal Breach, then pray for a pop. Once we have Ignite on the boss, we perpetuate it with Curse, refreshing the Ignite duration, which is standard practice for Ignite builds nowadays. Since our Ignites last 10 seconds, it's piss easy to keep that refresh going through everything the boss does, even when you have to dodge some mechanics or when the boss teleports away from you. And then tanky enough to just sit there in arena, forcing the enemy fire resistance to be negative 20 thanks to Ramako. We also pop an additional Infernal Cry to cover enemies with Ash and use Infused Channeling for a bit of extra damage boost. The total DPS is something like 5 million at minimum, and goes up drastically if you get lucky and have a magic or rare monster be the one to pop on top of the boss. The enemy popping can also do pretty decent damage on its own regardless of the Ignite, so with especially good luck you can watch a massive chunk of the boss's HP just disappear. In the background footage you should be able to see this in action with one of the tanky enemies Drox spawns walking up at the perfect time to BK the Wisp and Power and conquer. Now let's be honest, this shit's jank, pure jank. Wolfio style build. And no shade there, I love Wolfio's builds. They're super interesting and he's constantly experimenting with mechanics no one else looks at even. But at the end of the day, we're playing jank, and playing jank isn't for everyone. You're weapon swapping, flask swapping, ring swapping, wife swapping, you're retooling what is a high-speed auto bomber build into a boss mulcher on the fly. If you don't want to think about the jank, then just don't. Play the pure Mavic version of the build, it's pretty good and you don't need to think about Yaomac or Vaal breach pretty much ever. However, I found it really interesting and wanted to see how far Vaal breach could go. And it went further than I expected, to be honest. It's quite a lot of fun and I recommend giving it a go if you're willing to deal with a bit of weirdness in your build. As an aside, I also want to point out that this Yaomac tech is great for other builds in this league, specifically Viper Strike of the Mamba. Viper Strike of the Mamba only lets you apply one poison at a time, but you can still spread poisons from other enemies onto the poison targets. I.e., Vaal breach could temporarily 100x your damage against bosses. Just weapon swap, drop the Vaal breach, then swap back to your daggers or claws to Viper Strike. Poison spreads around the breach as it always does, stacks up on whatever boss you're fighting to deal massive damage in a couple seconds. Should be really cool and easy pull off. Yeah, that's the guide. Get tanky, light yourself on fire, run fast, and summon thousands of enemies from a different plane of existence to PK Eldritch Horrors. Shit's jank, sure, but it's a blast both literally and figuratively. Play Tuna's pure mapping version if you don't want the jank smoke.